You're listening to WWHI Muncie, Indiana, WCRD 91.3 FM, always better radio.
Now, your weather forecast from the forecasters at 91.3 WCRD.
Good afternoon, I'm weather forecaster Steven Deanna here for the WCRD weather team with a quick weather update. Today we reached a high of 48 degrees. We had those rain showers early in the morning, leaving us with cloudy skies, and those rain showers will continue overnight with a low of 45 degrees. However, temperatures will actually be increasing towards the upper 50s by tomorrow morning. With tomorrow, we'll have a high of 64 degrees, with showers in the morning, leaving us with cloudy skies in the afternoon once again, but scattered thunderstorms could occur in the evening hours, so keep that umbrella in handy. With winds out of south-southwest at 10 to 20 miles per hour, and for the next couple of days, highs will be in the upper 50s, low 60s, with rain chances occurring once again on Saturday. For more weather updates, please follow us on Twitter at WCRDWX and check out our blogs on WCRD.com.
Good evening and welcome into the Fantasy Express. I'm your host, Steven Sobek, and Robert, you staying warm over there on the other side of the desk?
Yeah, I got my sleeves rolled up right now, but I'm putting them back down because I got a little cold. It's chilly outside. I just heard the weather update, and it's getting cold again, and I'm really looking forward to wintertime.
Well, it's supposed to hit the 60s by the weekend, so We're maybe not totally done with the warmth yet, but hey, we'll take anything we can get in November. As always, you can follow us on Twitter at BSU Fantasy. Individually, my Twitter handle is at Steven_Sobek, and Robert, yours is?
At Robert L. Segovia. Segovia spelled Segovia.
We're going to start tonight's show off with some current news in the NFL. There's a ton to talk about aside from the fantasy things that we always discuss. And that is, first, Ezekiel Elliott. His suspension, it's been up and down, back and forth. He's in, he's out. Robert, what's the latest status?
Yeah, so the Players Association filed an appeal with the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals and denied Ezekiel Elliott's fight against the 6-game suspension, and he will serve the suspension up until December 17th now. There was an emergency appeal for Elliott to play, but it's looking like he's going to sit out until December 17th. He's third in rushing yards this season, tied for the league lead in touchdowns, and that's going to be big for the Cowboys going forward.
It's certainly complicated, and I think obviously we'll get to who you should pick up in terms of filling in for Elliott, and it's probably going to be Darren McFadden, his backup. He's going to be a huge waiver wire acquisition for this week. There's also a lot of people that are injured that you might need to replace. Joe Flacco being the one that everybody probably saw on every single highlight reel from Week 8, that nasty collision he had on that third down slide with Kiko Alonso. Dirty hit or not?
It was a dirty hit. I saw the footage afterwards. The helmet flew off, and I understand it was just an NFL play, but that was just a hard hit.
We can probably go on for the entire hour about that hit. I really think when it comes down to it, you look at it from a linebacker's perspective. It was 3rd and 9. Flacco's going towards the first down, trying to get there, and all of a sudden he pulls up short and slides. Kiko Alonso's not known for being a dirty player. I think he got the raw end of the deal, and then afterwards, all the pushing and shoving that ensued, you'd think there'd be some suspensions or at least some fines associated with that. But I'm gonna go with it was cleaner than we think.
Yeah, definitely.
So Flacco, we're going to have to watch his status come Week 9. Also, Zach Miller, another terrifying injury. Everybody saw it. He came down on his knee in the end zone. It bent the other way. There was concern that he might even lose his leg. So for fantasy purposes, he's out, and he might actually even be done for his entire career. He's 33. He's not getting any younger. Really sad situation. But Deion Sims, the tight end for the Bears, the backup tight end, should get a few more looks. Devontae Freeman is another guy that makes our injury list this week. He seems like he'll be able to give it a go. He roughed up his shoulder a little bit in the Jets game, but the coach, again, said, hey, probably not going to be a injury that'll keep him out very long. Tevin Coleman, not a bad guy to pick up, or at least consider starting if Freeman were, for whatever reason, not able to go this week. Duke Johnson, another one from Cleveland, the one fantasy relevant player from Cleveland. Oh no, he's down. He exited the game in the fourth quarter against the Vikings with a head injury, but he was cleared and maybe potential concussion, but did not turn out that way. So he'll be active come this week. Robert, there's a lot more on this list. You want to keep going?
Yeah, so we got Kenny Golladay from Detroit. He missed a significant portion of the season due to a hamstring injury since September 24th, and it's important to keep an eye on the injury report before the game. He could possibly start. Cole Beasley, he left the game with 4 minutes left in the third quarter with a concussion against the Redskins. So that's an important point for the Cowboys as their passing game is going to take over since Elliott is out until December 17th. For the Patriots, Chris Hogan came out in the fourth quarter in the Chargers game with a shoulder injury, but they are on bye, so he could even miss some time after that. And going to our last severe injury, it's Jameis Winston. He had a disappointing week 8, and he might have re-aggravated his shoulder, so he's going to be a game-time decision in week 9 versus the Saints. Ryan Fitzpatrick might make the start. As
a Jameis Winston owner, I'm really concerned because he just hasn't looked himself, and really all season. It isn't just since he's had this go around with the AC joint in his throwing shoulder. It's been all year. He's been up and down. He's 18th in quarterback scoring.
Wow,
at his position. So, and there's guys ahead of him, Josh McCown being one that I remember after looking at the page of the rankings. It's not really good for him and his team, and everybody thought coming into this season that he would be able to use all of his weapons, and that just has not been proven yet. So you've gotta hope he gets things turned around, and the injury's not helping his case. Trades. This was one of the craziest deadlines I think I can ever remember. You've got superstar players going from lesser teams to other teams that are competing and now are legitimate contenders, namely Buffalo and Philadelphia. The first one, Buffalo, acquired Kelvin Benjamin for a 3rd and a 7th round pick in next year's draft. That's a steal, I'm thinking, right, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, if there were questions before about who Buffalo's number 1 receiver was for Tyrod Taylor, it's all been answered. Kelvin Benjamin is the solution. He has 475 yards in the season. All the Bills receivers combined have 594 yards, so he definitely makes up for that loss in yardage, and Tyrod Taylor is going to have someone to throw to. The Bills are serious about playoffs this year.
Yeah, I don't think Buffalo ever had a guy to throw to out on the perimeter. LaShawn McCoy is really the only guy that comes to mind.
And Charles Clay before injury.
And now Clay has been injured, and hopefully he'll get back before the season's over. But some serious talent going to Buffalo, and some serious young talent at the quarterback position going to San Francisco. Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, if this wasn't, at first when I saw it, I thought, did the Patriots make the first mistake in what seems like, a decade in terms of managing their roster? And then it's almost like, you know what? Bill Belichick probably has something up his sleeve that we just don't know about yet. They signed Brian Hoyer, the Patriots did, from San Francisco onto New England. So they essentially swapped quarterbacks. But Garoppolo looks like a promising talent, good arm. We've seen him in a couple of games for New England. And granted, San Francisco's no New England on offense. We can, I'll be not the first guy to tell you that. But it does look promising for a couple of other guys, namely Carlos Hyde and maybe Pierre Garçon. So another trade that could have pretty large fantasy impacts, probably not this week, but going forward. And the last major trade was Jay Ajayi. Robert, this came as quite a surprise, not necessarily Ajayi leaving Miami, although that was a shocker, but where he ended up.
Yeah, he ends up on Philadelphia. They're primed for the Super Bowl. I mean, I know it's early again, but I think the Eagles are the best team in the NFC. They just added a talent to their running back position where most of the rushing yards came from Carson Wentz, and he needs to focus on the passing game. I know it's cool to have a dual threat like that, but he's no Tyrod Taylor. They need Jay Ajayi.
Well, and it's kind of like Buffalo's situation. They didn't have a guy at receiver. They go get Kelvin Benjamin. Philadelphia has been rotating backs out the entire year. It's been LeGarrette Blount and Wendell Smallwood when he can, Corey Clement. And now it's you'd like to think Jay Ajayi, and maybe on the goal line you hand it off to Blount. But I mean, talk about an impact player going to a team who already probably has the midseason MVP, Carson Wentz, and an established passing game provides even more balance for the Eagles. And I think they're very, very promising Super Bowl contenders. Is that kind of your opinion, Rob?
Yeah, I really like them and the Chiefs right now. I mean, the Chiefs have gone down a little bit, but I still like them going forward in the playoffs.
Yes, they are balanced enough. Now on to the madness of Week 9. We are halfway through the NFL season. There's 7 1:00 games. The first one we'll talk about is the Baltimore Ravens against the Tennessee Titans. Baltimore comes in 4-4. Tennessee's at 4-3. We already discussed Joe Flacco's injury. Really, the topic of conversation is Baltimore's backfield. Alex Collins, Buck Allen. What's the trend?
I really like Alex Collins. I've been saying it for a few weeks now that he was on my waiver wire as a choice. And last week he had 18 carries for 113 yards, received 30 yards. And I think Collins can be that answer since they aren't going to go forward in the passing game with Flacco injured. So Alex Collins is definitely the solution.
No, I think it's funny because Buck Allen over the last 4 weeks has actually outscored Alex Collins, but Alex Collins' stock is certainly rising. He had a great game last week, but Tennessee, they've only given up 2 rushing touchdowns to running backs this year. So maybe don't expect somebody to get in the end zone for Baltimore this week, but I would say you're starting both of them. Am I right?
Right, and Alex Collins isn't going to get you the touchdowns, but he is going to get the yards, and they're probably going to have to settle for field goals a lot, but I don't think Buck Allen's going to contribute as much as you would think, but Alex Collins is definitely going to get the yards.
Right, in Tennessee, they should get Delaney Walker back. Corey Davis, another guy, since week 2, he's been out with a hamstring injury. Receiver from the MAC, we always like those guys. But he should hopefully bolster Tennessee's passing attack because they have names. Rashard Matthews is a good receiver. Eric Decker's been proven, but he's not getting any younger. Corey Davis, some guy that can maybe spark their offense and more than just on the ground. Yeah,
I would hope so. And Marcus Mariota needs to really show why he's valued in Tennessee. He has 1,300 yards, 4 touchdowns, but 4 interceptions on the season. He does have 124 yards and 3 touchdowns rushing, but he needs the passing to go up and to compete with his draft competition, Jameis Winston, and both of them have struggled this season.
I was going to say not much competition on the other end of it. But I think I'm holding off on Corey Davis this week just to see what his role is and how healthy he is because let's face it, we've been faced with something similar. Davis is a rookie. Willie Snead was not, but Willie Snead on the Saints, hamstring injury plus a suspension. He was back in the offense, but he really wasn't. And so it could happen to Corey Davis against Baltimore, and Baltimore's pretty stingy against the pass. So all those things considered, I'd say sit and wait on Corey Davis for a week and see what they can do against the Baltimore Ravens. Tampa travels to New Orleans. We talked about Jameis Winston, and Doug Martin's really been the picture of consistency since he's returned from his suspension in the backfield. Jacquizz Rodgers has been relegated to a couple touches a game, so really you stash him on your bench as a handcuff to Martin. But he's been able to excel even when things are going wrong in the passing offense.
Yeah, the passing game, I mean, I'm looking down the list right now. Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson, Cameron Brate, O.J. Howard. No, I'm not going to say O.J. Howard is one of the passing threats.
Yeah, I think you mentioned his name last week.
I did mention it, and I said wait a week to see if that 2 touchdown performance was.
You were going to stay quiet, but I brought it up. So.
Yeah, and You know, he didn't have what he did the previous week. He only had 16 yards. So, you know, he's still 12.5. He had a 12.5% increase in the fantasy ownage, and I know all the people who picked him up thought he was going to have another 2-touchdown performance.
Right, and it's a very shallow position with all the injuries. Of course, we talk about it almost every time on this show. So OJ Howard, again, probably not much value considering Tampa turns the ball over a ton too, and the Saints have actually had 9 interceptions over the last 5 games. Winston can't hang on to the ball. When they're driving down the field, he forces a throw, sometimes tries to take off and run with it. Not a good decision. You know, on Sunday against Carolina, he fumbled. He I don't know if he presses too much or what the case is, but he's definitely turnover prone, and the Saints like takeaways. So I'd say Doug Martin, and really you're going to start Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson, but you're really not getting the production that you expected from them in week 1 going forward.
And with that injury to Jameis Winston, you're hoping Ryan Fitzpatrick can take over and get those receivers the ball, and they're going to hope for the Saints to downgrade in the interception game.
Right. I think Dirk Cutter's going to play things pretty conservatively with Fitzpatrick. I think you give a boost to Doug Martin if Jameis cannot go, but you'd like to think that he'll also face some pretty stacked boxes. If you're, the Saints and calling defensive shots, trying to stop the one guy that's been working for this offense. Drew Brees and that entire Saints passing attack has been tremendous. And again, this is one of the only backfields, and really I think Baltimore has become fantasy relevant, both guys, Collins and Allen, but Kamara and Ingram, they're legitimate. Mark Ingram fumbled twice though down the stretch against Chicago. Does that do you take that into consideration? Does that affect his fantasy value, at least in terms of, is Sean Payton going to put him out there in the crunch time situations?
I feel like Alvin Kamara is going to get more touches just for that fact alone, but I really don't take fumbles into consideration, especially after that first week with the Chiefs. Kareem Hunt, he fumbled on his first play, so that didn't really factor much into the season. So I'm really looking for the Saints running game to have an impact in this game. And Breeze last week, he only had 299 yards, 0 touchdowns. Zero touchdowns.
Well, yeah, the touchdown number certainly stands out, but only 299 yards. I mean, he's going to be productive every single week.
And when you compare that to Matthew Stafford, who we'll get into later, he had over 400 yards, 0 touchdowns. So that's why I say only.
And Jameis Winston, a quarterback in this game, if he starts, is a guy who puts up a ton of yardage, and touchdowns are extra. And that's kind of, like I said, that's kind of what you want out of a quarterback. So Breeze, an elite fantasy option on Sunday. And so's Jared Goff. He's going against the New York Giants secondary in our next game that has suspended Janoris Jenkins indefinitely, their best cover corner. And he's got a variety of options to throw to. Robert Woods, Todd Gurley out of the backfield. And Cooper Kupp's name is on here too, but I think Sammy Watkins has been the biggest disappointment in probably all of fantasy football at the wide receiver position.
Do you think Sammy Watkins would have been better in Buffalo this season with Tyrod Taylor?
I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, because then I wonder if they would have acquired Kelvin Benjamin.
Yeah, that is.
So I would think Watkins would have been a little bit more productive, because it's kind of in Buffalo. It's one option in the run game, and that would have been one option in the pass game. But it's tough to say. And really, he's had injury issues seemingly his whole career. And it's just a tough one. But in Los Angeles, he's not getting the looks. He's just not. Robert Woods is being consistent for you, but his problem is he can't find the end zone. So it's a really aggravating offense in that they're a good team. They put up a lot of points. Greg Zuerlein's, he's the number 1 fantasy kicker. It probably was not drafted at all by anybody. And now he's probably on a ton of rosters at the starting kicking position. But Los Angeles is it's one of those teams where their real life product is better than their fantasy product. And I think we're going to probably see that again against the Giants, because I can't imagine they're going to score very much with all their injuries. Sterling Shepard at receiver for New York, likely to give it a go. He's been out the last few weeks with that ankle injury. Evan Ingram at tight end, another guy. He's your guy. You like him. It's really a couple of options for Manning in the passing game, and he doesn't trust anybody. No. He really doesn't trust anybody else.
He has 1,600 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions, but that really doesn't speak much when you're talking about the Giants. So, Orleans Darkwa, I talked about him a few weeks ago, and he has 274 yards and a touchdown. Not much, but I still like his fantasy production.
If you had to, who's getting more looks here, more targets, Ingram or Shepard this week?
Ingram, for sure. I like Ingram in this passing offense. He has 342 yards and 3 touchdowns receiving this season. Especially their previous week, he had 60 yards and a touchdown, so he's just been very consistent.
Oh, and it's funny because I've seen more so than really any other year at the tight end position. I've seen a lot of people start tight ends in their flex. That's how many injuries that have hit this league, and so Shepard and Ingram could be solid flex starts. So in terms of who you should start, Ingram's a pretty good shot, but Eli Manning's shown that Sterling Shepard is indeed a weapon in his offense. So look out for him as well. Denver, a team that cannot score, travels to Philadelphia to take on the 7-1 Eagles. Seems like everything's on the up for them. Not so much for the Denver offense. Trevor Siemian, there's some murmurings around that team that he could no longer be the starter, maybe?
Right. It's going to be him or Brock Osweiler or Paxton Lynch.
I don't like those options.
No. Who would you take, though?
Siemian. Yikes. No, oh, man. Osweiler and Paxton. Paxton Lynch is unproven. He has that going for him. I guess he really hasn't, been able to show what he's capable of. But I wonder if you're the third stringer behind Trevor Siemian and Brock Osweiler, what is there to like? So I think Simeon's the guy, but none of them are starters on any team.
And nobody else on the roster either. Demaryius Thomas, he was the only highlight, 66 yards. So,
right. And his production, I think, is based solely on the fact that there is no Emmanuel Sanders. He's been out for a few weeks. And CJ Anderson, he's gotten his fair share of yardage on the ground, but Devontae Booker and Jamal Charles are eating into his carries. And between the three, Anderson had 15 and then the other two had about 14. So 50-50 split between the starter and then his two backups. Something to look forward to on Sunday. Philadelphia stops the run. They're a good team. They have a good defensive front. They're just solid all around. Philadelphia's running game, the huge question is where do they go from here? Is Jay Ajayi, he hadn't scored a touchdown on Miami. Are owners loving this move?
Yeah, I think he fits well into this Eagles offense, and they're going to get him a lot of looks. Blunt did have 48 yards and a touchdown last week. I think they decrease his production. They get Ajayi to get more involved in the offense, especially taking away from Wentz a little bit. He's still going to get his passing yards, but you like Ajayi in this game.
Yeah, everybody will get theirs on Philadelphia, it seems. But Denver, a team that relies on their defense to stay in ball games. We've seen it time and again. They're really going to have to step up if they want to hang with Philadelphia. So maybe take into consideration the fact that Denver's a decently elite defense, but you're starting everybody. You're starting Ajayi, even though we don't know what his role is going to be. Wentz, Aguilar, another guy. Jeffrey kind of underperformed this year. Start him. You're starting everybody. Atlanta and Carolina also play at 1 o'clock on Sunday. The next game we will talk about, and really it features two well-known quarterbacks that are having pretty up and down seasons.
Yeah, you have Matt Ryan and Cam Newton. Matt Ryan, 254 yards last week and 2 touchdowns. Tevin Coleman is going to get more of the carries with Devontae Freeman's injury. And, I mean, both of them are solid options with Ryan's struggle this season. But, yeah, I start everyone on this team. And what about you?
Yeah, Atlanta's one of those start your studs kind of teams, especially this week. Carolina shut down Tampa Bay, but Matt Ryan hasn't necessarily had the turnover problems. It's just been mental mistakes. He fumbled a couple of snaps. Granted, it was very treacherous in New York last week, but he's just had problems driving his team down the field consistently. But there's also nobody in that offense that you're not going to play, on your fantasy team. So that's the case for Atlanta. Carolina, Devin Funchess, is he the guy now? No Kelvin Benjamin. Can he finally have his breakout, I guess would be his breakout second half of the season? Can he do that?
Yeah, I was going to say Devin Funchess is the man now, and especially with Kelvin Benjamin gone. But Christian McCaffrey is going to be the leader of that offense, essentially. I mean, he's only a rookie, but Cam Newton can't get his game going. So you're going to rely on short dump-offs to McCaffrey and get him involved in the running game. He's going to be the dual threat player that you need in fantasy. So I like him. Yeah,
McCaffrey's PPR gold. I mean, really, he gets all the targets, even with Benjamin in the lineup. So I can't imagine what his level of production is going to be without him. I say he's now elevated himself into the top tier of running backs. And really, coming into the season, you had Dalvin Cook, who we all know is lost for the year with an ACL injury, Joe Mixon, Leonard Fournette, and McCaffrey, all in the same tier around, I would say, round 3 in the draft. You had a decision to make. If you were going with a running back, which it seems like a lot of drafts did, that running backs went off the board early, who were you going to pick up? McCaffrey seems to turned out very well if you sided with him. And then there's Leonard Fournette. We'll get to him having a tremendous season. So Carolina, the options there, Funchess, McCaffrey, and unfortunately there really doesn't seem to be another receiver on that roster that's going to fill in for what Funchess was, because Funchess has to become what Kelvin Benjamin was. So really Curtis Samuel, not a guy that I like. Cincinnati and Jacksonville. Hey, look at that, Jacksonville. Leonard Fournette. We're going to go right to him, actually, because we just mentioned his name, and facing Cincinnati, that they give up quite a few yards on the ground, and I think it's going to be Fournette all day long.
Yeah, Fournette, he had 130 yards and a touchdown in Week 6. That was his last game, and I think he's the only player in this matchup that you can rely on. Andy Dalton on the Bengals, he had 243 yards and 2 touchdowns last week, but AJ Green hasn't gotten as much production as you would like in fantasy because of Dalton.
Yeah, that's tough, because I mean, it seems like AJ Green's more involved in the red zone, which is something that obviously you're going to love if you own any kind of fantasy team, PPR or otherwise. Red zone targets are probably the number one thing you look for in a player, in a receiver especially. So with that being said, I don't know. I think maybe looks in the middle of the field are getting taken away from him more and more because teams are keying on him in the passing game. But I think maybe his production's just transferring a little bit to more so goal line looks, which is never a bad thing. So fire up AJ Green. Jacksonville, very stingy pass defense, though. Look out. They made Ben Roethlisberger look silly on the road, but Jacksonville's the home team in this one, so I can't imagine Andy Dalton's going to be very effective. Are you starting him this week?
No, especially with Jacksonville's defense. They've really been one of the best defenses in the league, and I think that might push them to the playoffs.
I think this might be a little bit of a hot take, but Joe Mixon, I really think that he's going to be the top fantasy scorer on Cincinnati this week, given the fact that Jacksonville shuts down the pass and have been, at least, if you're going to compare their pass defense to run defense, vulnerable against the run. So Mixon, a guy that really wanted the boatload of carries, had asked the coaches to be more involved, to believe in him. I really think Mixon's going to have a solid outing. And then Jacksonville, it's really Leonard Fournette. Blake Bortles made my waiver wire list this week simply because even though Cincinnati is good at defending the pass, Bortles, play action. I mean, it's as simple as that. When you're ripping off chunk gains of 6-7 yards every play, Fournette, I mean, he was talking about how the NFL was slower than he thought, and I thought, yeah, this guy, a rookie just trying to say some things, getting some people stirred up. He wasn't joking. It must be slow motion out there for him because he's proving his value in that backfield. So I think it might open up some opportunities for Blake Bortles this week. Keep that in mind when you are setting your roster, especially again with 6 more teams on the bye. That's a trend. Thank goodness it will end this week. No longer will we have so much of the NFL taking a break. Indianapolis travels to Houston. Is there really anything to talk about on Indy besides Jack Doyle?
Just Jack Doyle. Like, he had 121 yards and a touchdown last week, and he had the most yards for Jacoby Brissett. That's his main target. And maybe T.Y. Hilton, you think so? Or do you think there might be some trade rumors around
Well, it was funny because obviously the trade deadline, it's come and gone. But I think if you were a betting man and you were, saying, okay, let's assess the situation, certain team needs on teams like, maybe not Buffalo and Philadelphia, but teams that would need one piece to make them contenders. You thought, maybe T.Y. Hilton's the guy that those teams look to. That wasn't the case. I did not think, from a Colts perspective, that it would have been wise to get rid of Hilton because you have to, yes, he's been down, but so is Amari Cooper. Let's face it, Amari Cooper has the same situation surrounding him, and he had a down year and then bounced back in a big way 2 weeks ago. Hilton doesn't have Andrew Luck. I mean, we talk about Chuck Pagano making the excuse that he doesn't have Andrew Luck. I think T.Y. Hilton has way more of an excuse to say, hey, I don't have the franchise quarterback throwing to me. I have Jacoby Brissett taking these little dump down throws to Jack Doyle over here, waving his hands wide open in the middle of the field while I'm getting targeted, and stopped by the other team's best cornerback. So I think T.Y., you're going to start him. I don't think there's any question to that, but his production's just not been where you wanted it to be. Houston's all about production, though. I mean, Deshaun Watson, Will Fuller, Lamar Miller, Hopkins, all elite options. Running back for Miller and the other receivers dominating their position.
Yeah, Deshaun Watson's a big factor in that. 4 touchdowns last week, 400 yards. See, there's a touchdown production that you would need with all those passing yards. He did have 3 interceptions. We said that...
You'll take the turnovers.
Yeah, you said last week that the Seahawks would be the big test for Watson. Did he pass it?
See, that's rough because obviously you want your quarterback to limit the turnovers, and they did end up falling short. But I don't think a lot of people necessarily expected them to compete as well as they did. So I would say it was a pass. Seattle's always going to be a tough game on the schedule, especially when you're on the road in CenturyLink. They're in a weak division. They're playing one of the teams from their division, and you could see how weak it is. And so I think going forward, he's going to be able to really put everything on cruise control. It's crazy to think that a rookie can do this.
Right, and he's getting the ball to DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller. Fuller over 100 yards, Hopkins over 200, and both of them have 7 touchdowns, tied for the league lead. Right,
so I mean, yeah, Deshaun Watson, I would say he did pass that test, and he had the pick 6 to Earl Thomas. Sherman got him on 1, but you take the good with the bad, especially with rookies, and as long as the interceptions aren't going to become a thing for him, you keep going with him, and so. Deshaun Watson has pleasantly surprised this year for Houston. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back, go through our college pick'em, and then run down the rest of the NFL games. You're listening to the Fantasy Express on WCRD 91.3, Always Better Radio.
Man, last night we put on an epic light show.
So epic.
The crowd loved us.
Wait, there were only 4 people out.
Join the Alpha Center on Saturday, November 11th for their 30th annual Spaghetti Dinner fundraiser. The nonprofit Alpha Center is an adult day service center providing, in a supervised environment, activities and stimulation for older adults. Adult tickets are just $8. Children 6 to 10, $4, and kids under 5 eat free. Bring the whole family for a great meal and support a great cause with all-you-can-eat spaghetti. You can also buy raffle tickets to win a variety of prizes. So check out the Alpha Center Spaghetti Dinner from 4:30 to 7 p.m. on Saturday, November 11th at the Knights of Columbus building at 3600 West Purdue Avenue.
This is the news. This morning, we are saluting the 2.2 million women who have joined in the war effort. They now make up 37% of the workforce, changing their role forever.
The prestigious Harvard Medical School is breaking ground today, opening its doors to new female applicants.
Today, little girls all over the world look to the sky, where the first woman is now in space.
Military stereotypes are challenged today with the trailblazing promotion of a U.S. female officer to four-star general. It was just announced that the vast majority of last year's doctorate degrees were earned by women.
We've come so far, but our news is changing for the worse. More women die from heart disease and stroke than men, even though it can be prevented. Make a change at GoRedForWomen.org today. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the American Heart Association's Go Red for Women.
We're back on the Fantasy Express. It's time for some college pick'em. I am 10-6. Robert, you're 9-7. We're pretty close in terms of our season-long picks. To recap last week, Oklahoma State defeated West Virginia in Morgantown. So, Robert, you got that one right. I did not. Not really a close game. The score was closer than if you watch the game, what the product was on the field. TCU, the upset. I called it. I had it. Iowa State defeats them 14-7. North Carolina State at Notre Dame. Notre Dame, in dominating fashion, took that one 35-14. We both had that one right. And I did, I correct myself. Last week, I kind of set up Robert to pick NC State, and he went with it, but he indeed had Notre Dame. So we both had that one correct. And then Penn State, another close loss for Robert. You're really having some tough luck as of late. 1 point defeat there. So I got that one right. I had Ohio State. They came back in that one. Really shook up the college football playoff rankings that were released last night. Going into this week, there's a ton of ranked matchups. We're going to stick to 4 games, but there's a lot more that we could talk about. The first one, LSU, number 19, going to Alabama. What's the verdict?
Well, LSU has been surging in recent weeks after that loss to Troy, but I like Alabama in this one.
I don't think they can surge enough to get out of the way of Nick Saban and his team. I also like Alabama. Big 12 matchup: Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Bedlam in Stillwater. Who do you have?
Well, I have Oklahoma State simply because they stopped Texas and West Virginia. They will have a shootout with Oklahoma, but I like State in this one.
I'm going to go with Oklahoma because I feel as though Oklahoma State has turned into Clemson from a few years back, and that they can't win the big statement game, especially at home. I like Baker Mayfield, big leader for that team, emotional leader, so I'm going to go with Oklahoma. Penn State goes to East Lansing. They face number 24 Michigan State. Can Sparty, contain Saquon Barkley at all?
Well, I mean, it was a tough loss against Ohio State, and I expect them to come back and win the game against the Spartans. So I have Penn State.
Well, I think it's going to be super physical. Michigan State, they played Michigan really tough. You remember that game in the rain. So, I think Michigan State's going to keep it closer than a lot of people think. Penn State needs style points. They are on the outside looking in. There's no two ways about it. So it's Penn State for me. Lastly, Clemson goes to North Carolina State, who's coming off that tough defeat to Notre Dame, but they're still undefeated in their conference.
We do have another high-ranked team in Clemson, and I don't expect them to go down like Penn State did to Ohio State, simply because Clemson is in playoff contention and North Carolina State isn't.
See, my head's telling me Clemson, my heart and my gut is telling me North Carolina State. I'm going to play it safe and stick with the brains. I'm going with Clemson to go on the road and get a victory against the Wolfpack. 3 4:00 games on this upcoming Sunday. The first is Arizona at San Francisco. Again, the Garoppolo acquisition by the Niners is something to keep tabs of, but I don't think he's going to start this week because it's really quick to learn that offense. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't like anyone on the 49ers. Garoppolo.
They're kind of like the Cleveland Browns, right?
Exactly. And that's why I always go against them every week. I didn't this week, but I wanted to. And the Cardinals, they have Larry Fitzgerald and maybe Adrian Peterson.
They do. I was going to say they also have a guy named Adrian Peterson who sets up very nicely against the worst rush defense in the league. Look for him to have a huge day. He might even be a really good pickup if you're rostering guys for maybe a weekly team that you put together. Peterson should be the focal point of your running game if you do that. So I like Peterson and Fitzgerald. Aside from that, remember Drew Stanton's at quarterback. Carson Palmer's out with that broken arm. So keep that in mind going forward. Washington goes to CenturyLink Field, Seattle's second straight home game. Kirk Cousins, what do we make of that? The whole passing game and really the receiving core, because it seems to be a jumbled up mess.
He did go 263 yards and a touchdown last week, and he's top 10 in touchdowns and yards. But you're right, there's really no one in the receiving core that you can trust. Maybe Vernon Davis, but that's
simply because Jordan Reed is likely to miss this game. It's Jordan Reed being Jordan Reed, everybody. He, again, questionable. It seems to, doesn't even really matter what the injury is. The poor guy has been dealing with so many throughout his entire career. Vernon Davis, a guy maybe you should look to fill in at tight end for Washington. And then Seattle. Paul Richardson, is he the new Doug Baldwin? I remember in 2015, Doug Baldwin went on that stretch where he had 4 straight games with multiple touchdown receptions. Richardson had 2 this past week, 1 the previous week. What do you make of that development?
It was a huge week last week for the Seahawks and the Texans, and they both played really well in that game, but Seattle came up on top, and Russell Wilson had 452 yards, 4 touchdowns. He even got a little on the rushing game, 30 yards. Paul Richardson benefited the most from that, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns on 6 targets. He's 6th in touchdowns with 5, and I just think he's going to keep going on that streak like you were talking about.
Yes, that he did. And here's an interesting stat before we move on. Doug Baldwin hasn't had more than 6 fantasy points in games when he doesn't catch a touchdown pass. No fewer than 15 when he does. It's boom or bust for that guy. You're starting him every week, but just be aware that he's rather volatile, in terms of whether Wilson will target him or not. He kind of has a favorite receiver of the week, shall we say. Our last 4:00 game actually kicking off a little bit later than the rest. Kansas City and Dallas. This should be a very good game, and we were hoping, obviously, that Zeke would be able to suit up. It's tending to look like he's not going to, so we're going to talk about Darren McFadden in the rushing attack. Does Jason Garrett still give the running game the ball?
I would say no.
Not even with that offensive line?
I mean, yeah, they're going to protect Dak Prescott. They're going to want him to get involved, especially because they have Des Bryant as a target. I don't know if they trust Darren McFadden completely as the starter, but I mean, you have to take a look in fantasy because they do have that strong offensive line. And I just really think Dak Prescott's going to benefit most from the suspension.
I do think you're right. I think they're going to stick with the run game a little bit more than we might think. But Des Bryant really seems like the only receiving option. There was a chance, maybe I was hoping, Cole Beasley, Bryce Butler, somebody else maybe having fantasy relevance. Not the case. It's Dez. Now it's Darren McFadden and obviously Dak Prescott for that team. And then Kansas City, this is another case of start your studs. Very similar to Atlanta. Except they're winning.
Yeah, Alex Smith, 202 yards and a touchdown. Not very impressive. But, I mean, when you have names like Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill to throw to, and then Kareem Hunt, I love him. He's been my favorite player all season.
Okay.
He's fun to watch.
Robert has an official man crush, the first official man crush of the year on one Kareem Hunt, former MAC running back.
Yep, he's my guy.
So just so everybody knows. All right. Sunday night, Oakland, Miami. Miami, man, Adam Gase literally called out his offense as being football's worst. So can you really trust anybody?
Nope. Ajayi's gone. Everyone else is done for. They're the new Cleveland Browns / San Francisco 49ers.
That's harsh.
No,
that's rough. No, I can agree with you in some aspects. I do think, Jarvis Landry's still there. They're going to throw to him, especially in PPR. He's going to get his looks. If Devontae Parker comes back, which I think he does, Kenny Stills is downgraded. Those are the two developments I think that are important to note against Oakland. Amari Cooper, he finally normaled out a little bit after going off the rails against Kansas City. He only had 48 receiving. I mean, that's still a great number, but for his, somebody of his caliber, a little lacking. Crabtree, another great game. He's really, I would say, I always thought Amari Cooper was the most consistent guy in Oakland, and Crabtree was the wild card on a week-to-week basis. The script has been flipped.
Yeah, Crabtree's been the touchdown target for Derek Carr. And you're right, I did think Cooper was going to be the more consistent guy, especially me picking him in the first round or two. And I really needed him to be my fantasy guy, but he hasn't been. It's been Kareem Hunt for me and LaShawn McCoy and, all these other guys. Amari Cooper's sat on the bench for most of my season, so I really like Crabtree in this game.
Right, and a lot of people come up with creative names for their fantasy team. I think you should just stick with I love Kareem Hunt. I think that would be very, very adequate.
I'm actually going to change that after the game.
Yes, okay, perfect. Moving on to Monday night, NFC North battle between Detroit and Green Bay on the frozen tundra, but no Aaron Rodgers, so something to look at. For Detroit, it's a winnable game, certainly. Matthew Stafford's been productive. There's been no Kenny Galladay. I thought, last week I thought he might come back. He hasn't, so it's Golden Tate, right?
Yeah, and Detroit has a real chance to take over the division. The Vikings are, the top dog, but they still have some positions to fix on that team. And then the Packers, they're a nobody team without Aaron Rodgers. You have Aaron Jones, his Aaron brother, but that's it. And then the Bears, I thought they could, come out on top, but they lost that game against the
Saints. It is a very wide open division, and I would say it's very frustrating as an owner of Amir Abdullah that he's clearly their number one back, but they refuse to give him the ball on the goal line. It's ridiculous. How much they refuse to give him the ball. Dwayne Washington had some carries on the goal line. They put in Theo Riddick in the passing game, but they just won't give it to Abdullah. So I really wouldn't expect very many more, if any, touchdowns for Abdullah the rest of the season. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's really what it looks like. And Green Bay, you mentioned Brett Hundley, someone who doesn't seem to be able to make the plays with his arm, which is rough considering Detroit's in the bottom third of the league at defending the pass. But we'll see if he can make some plays scrambling and extending the play. I'm going to have to, I'm going to be forced to start him simply because you've got, 6 more teams on that bye week, and he's going to have to fill in for me. I will be without Phillip Rivers, and that brings us into the waiver wire section of our show. Remember, the Chicago Bears, Cleveland Browns, Minnesota, New England, Pittsburgh, and the Los Angeles Chargers are all on byes this week. So that means you'll be without guys like Jordan Howard, Tariq Cohen for Chicago, Cleveland. Yeah, we'll skip that one. Case Keenum, McKinnon, Thielen and Diggs from Minnesota, Brady and his bunch in New England, Pittsburgh, Big Ben, the Killer Bees, and also Juju Smith-Schuster. We got him. He was a waiver wire claim a few weeks back, and he's really done his job for the Steelers. And then Phillip Rivers, Melvin Gordon, Keenan Allen, and maybe even Hunter Henry. So who do you like at quarterback, Robert?
Well, I like Tyrod Taylor, especially with the addition of Kelvin Benjamin. It's going to look good for him if you need someone off the waiver wire. 64% owned. He's really the only quarterback I like on my waiver wire.
I'm with you. I also like Jimmy Garoppolo, simply not this week, but he's only 0.9% owned, and going forward, you might need him. If there's any more injuries at quarterback, he might be someone you stash on your bench. Running back, if you have room, Damian Williams or Kenyon Drake for Miami. Since Ajayi's not there, you really don't like anybody on Miami, but if one of those guys emerge, it's a starting running back. That's what you look for at this time of year. So I think I'd favor Kenyon Drake. He's more of a hard-nosed back, quicker than Williams, seems to want it a little bit more. Robert, who do you think people should look at as far as running back acquisitions on the waiver wire?
Well, for me, I like Alex Collins and Orleans Darkwa. I talked about them earlier. Collins at 32% owned, Darkwa at 39%. And maybe Darren McFadden. He might get all the touches that Elliott had. I don't know if they're going to trust him fully. Like I said, they might just stick with Dak Prescott in the passing game, but you have to look at him going forward.
Absolutely. And at wide receiver, you like Paul Richardson and Robbie Anderson. Talk a little bit more about him. We've already gone over Richardson.
Yeah, Anderson, he had 104 yards and a touchdown in that game against the Falcons. The previous matchup, he also had a touchdown, and Anderson, I ended up having him on the bench in
we all run
game.
into that problem. It's all right. It's all right.
I end up starting the guys that do worse than the people on the bench.
That's all right.
He is 26% owned. You have to pick him up.
Absolutely. And Corey Davis, a guy maybe a lot of people dropped after his injury, I would pick him up. Not start him this week, but watch how he does on Sunday. Lastly, at tight end, Vernon Davis, totally contingent on Jordan Reed's health. He's only 13% owned. And as total dart throws, I like Austin Hooper and potentially A.J. Derby for the Broncos. So that's my advice at the tight end position. Let's see if I'm on the right track come this weekend. Last game on the docket for tonight, Thursday night. It's Buffalo. It's the New York Jets. Kelvin Benjamin in his new role. We'll answer this question and move on. Bigger fantasy impact, Benjamin's acquisition. Is it on Tyrod Taylor or LeSean McCoy?
Well, I think it brings Taylor up in fantasy points, and it just decreases production for LeSean McCoy. I still like McCoy starting, but he's not going to get the points that he did.
Fair enough. I think actually Benjamin being at receiver might shift the defensive focus away from McCoy in the backfield, which is why I think maybe both of these guys, McCoy's already putting up large numbers, but both of their production numbers go up from here. And then the Jets, it's Robbie Anderson. Really, he's the only guy that is really worth rostering aside from Josh McCown. Of course, he's top 10.
Pretty consistent, yeah.
Right, he's awesome. And, maybe Robbie Anderson will be able to make it 3 straight games with the touchdown. Forte and Powell have not been able to run the ball out of the backfield, but they had 9 catches for 73 yards, and Buffalo is mid-pack in defending the pass against opposing running backs. So something to keep in mind. Lastly, our eliminator pick. I'm 4-0, actually 8-0 since the show began. We're not going to go there. I'll stick with 4-0 to make Robert feel okay. Atlanta edged the Jets 25-20 on the road. I'm taking the Eagles over Denver this week. Robert, who do you have?
Well, yeah, last week I beat the Eagles beat the 49ers. I didn't beat them. And then this week I'm going with the Jaguars over the Bengals. Jaguars defense is really the focus in this game, and Leonard Fournette.
All right, you heard it here first. Jacksonville over Cincinnati this weekend. It's been a great show, Robert. We'll see you next week for more Fantasy Express. For Robert Segovia, I'm Steven Sobek. You've been listening to the Fantasy Express on WCRD 91.3, Always Better Radio.